So for me, a computer has always been a bicycle of the mind.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Mind Bicycle, where today we're going to be talking about AI and mental health and what the future of mental health looks like with AI. And we have Max Gomez here. He is a mental health professional here in Pensacola, and we would all love to hear what his view is on how AI is impacting the field.
Yeah. Uh, Gabe, thanks for having me. My name is Max Comis. I am a registered mental health intern here in Pensacola. I'm working towards full licensure. And yeah, my job is to work with people who have anxieties and depressions and these big life changes that they're going through. And we're seeing these issues increase more and more, right? We have 20% anxiety, depression rates, suicide rates are at all-time highs, or they were during COVID. I haven't checked statistics recently, but we have startling statistics on this kind of stuff, right? Um, with regards to AI, we talk about this a lot, but the world is rapidly evolving because of the fast-paced nature of technology. Everything's evolving very rapidly. So in turn, maybe people don't know how their own lives are evolving either, what direction they're going. So that kind of goes for me into this aspect of meaning making and the meaning crisis. What are people actually doing with their lives alongside this technological advance? What brings their life meaning and purpose? How are they connecting with themselves and the world around them? And what direction do they really want to go if AI is making our lives increasingly convenient? Is this making sense so far?
I think so.
Okay.
And I would say you would probably know more about this than I do, but there seems like there has been a deficit in a sense of people actually seeking mental health counseling when they should, and also of people who could even afford mental health at all to begin with. So it seems like uh, people using tools like ChatGPT as like a just like a basic mental health counselor is going to open up people to the concept of counseling in general more.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems that way. It's actually wonderful because maybe there's people in more rural areas of the world where they don't have access to mental health care, or maybe there's political policies in place where people aren't getting the funding for mental health care, or institutions aren't getting the funding, which is a tragedy. But things like artificial intelligence may actually allow people to get some start to their mental health. You can think of it maybe as an introduction to contemplative practice. They're actually doing some reflection in their lives, treating AI as their counselor in a way, and people in the counseling field are probably going to throw their arms up and say, it's stealing my job, but this is reality. It can actually help us into deeper states of reflection, I think.
Yeah, and it does seem like a lot of people struggle to find a good counselor too. And I'm not going to say that ChatGPT is a good counselor. It seems like it kind of could stand in for a bad counselor, like somebody who is just there to just ask very basic questions. Um, but there are some dangers involved as well, right?
Sure, I think alongside anything, um if you're sitting with something that is just affirming you and not really challenging your thoughts, maybe, and maybe that system or that counselor, that person in that instance in the counseling setting is turning into an echo chamber for you. And in that case, is that person really progressing in their mental health? So a good counselor, as well as a good AI program, either way you want to go, but a good counselor is that person there to not only listen to you compassionately and be there with you and offer the space of safety so you can talk about these things maybe that you've never talked about before with anybody ever in your life, but also to challenge you in these ways that other people may not be comfortable with challenging you. And we
Yeah.
need that. Everybody needs that to truly progress. We can't actually grow if we stay stagnant in the same ideas and the same routines that are making us sick and unhealthy.
Yeah. Like I've seen this issue with one of these AIs. I think Claude was one of them where people like were practically falling in love with it, but it was also like a very validating kind of AI and it has a lot of personality involved with it. But it is a bit of a sycophant where it does just kind of act very nicely towards you all the time, and it doesn't have that built in to just be like, listen, like you are on your shit too much and you've got to change this unless you specifically ask for that. And a lot of people are not going to go out of their way to specifically ask for that kind of feedback, and a lot of people really don't want it.
It's true. People have to want to reflect, and people have to want to dive into the things that they don't necessarily want to. Maybe what Jung called their shadow aspects, which are difficult to become aware of in the first place. And that's why, again, counselors are good because you can't hide stuff from someone who's diving into these things for their job.
Right. Right. And this is where even incentives are important because the AI companies don't necessarily have that incentive to drive users away by telling them truths they don't want to hear. They have the incentive to keep people using
Uh,
their platforms as
that
much
makes
as
sense.
possible. But then there's a lot of debates about what alignment means. Like, what is a model that is aligned to help humans?
Hmm.
And is it just a model that's always nice to people all the time, that is just only a helpful assistant?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it a model that actually is going to sometimes tell somebody what they don't want to hear when it is not asked for, but something that they maybe do need to hear?
Mm. So you're saying that AI models could provide this and may go that direction.
They might eventually be able to, yeah. But it's like, I think it's this question of there's always debates around alignment, like what is an aligned model? Um, and I think that some of these things could do that more if the companies really wanted them to. But I think on some level they don't really want that because it will drive people away. A lot of people don't want to face some of these things.
I gotcha. And it seems like to me the main question here is what's actually facilitating human growth. And at this point in time, maybe these AI programs don't really do this. They don't provoke the questions, the challenging questions that people really need, but counselors do. So at that point, how can AI actually serve us? That goes into just basic reflection. Okay, who am I? Maybe what are my values? Existential type questions. Um, Even where am I? You know, where am I going next? Kind of thing. But yeah, I'm stumbling here. But maybe you can help me out.
Yeah. Um, it it seems like that like the AI uh is going to just provide that basic level for a lot of people, but for mental health as a whole, it's going to change direction. Probably because AI cannot relate to the human experience fully. It can like maybe understand it on some level, but being like an embodied human is just a completely different type of experience, and really only a human can fully comprehend it.
Right, and that's what I was getting at. Thank you. It's like we can ask the chat these reflective questions and get to know ourselves a little bit more deeply. And then what do we do? Eventually, we have to take it into the real world and, like you said, become embodied with these values that we're learning. And then in the counseling setting, maybe we can even go from AI to the counseling setting. Okay, I'm learning these things about myself. And how do I start to embody these things? How do I practice what I preach? And it starts with human connection. It's actually opening up to people across from us and saying, this is what I believe in, and this is how I want to grow, and this is how I want to live my life.
Right. And I've even seen some counselors starting to almost use AI as like a marketing funnel for themselves, where they will like almost make like an AI avatar of themselves, and
Oh,
they'll like have an AI voice that's like maybe like their voice, and have the AI ask like some types of questions that they might ask as like an introductory phase. But I think that is actually a funnel because they recognize that people uh, need to go deeper, and they are going to want like a real person who is embodied that can relate to them on that level.
you're giving all the therapists out there ideas, Gabe.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not bad. It's not a bad idea because again, it does transition into real world interaction. And to me, it's the swing of the pendulum, right? We see this development in artificial intelligence and people connecting with the technological world. Screens, we have a lot of screen time. We have a lot of scrolling, and people say, "Oh, we're doom scrolling too much and spending too much on technology." But there's this countercultural swing of the pendulum, like with anything, where people, I think, want genuine human connection. And maybe this is why podcasts are getting popular as well, right? Like we actually want to be there with each other and listen to each other and have good conversations and dance and sing and laugh like what humans are supposed to do.
Yeah, it's a way of relating to each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's what we're used to, at least. I mean, conversations is what we've been doing for like I don't know, at least 100,000 years.
Exactly. It's extremely evolutionary and perhaps some of the reason that again 20% of the US is depressed or is because there's that lack of connection. You could easily say that disconnection is the cause of a lot of our modern mental health illnesses. Disconnection not only from each other, but disconnection from ourselves and going back to our own values and what we want and our sense of presence and how we relate to the world. And then how we relate to others and how we relate to the environment and the universe as a whole.
Yeah. And I guess the other aspect is that AI is driving so much change. In the last episode, we talked about how, if we're not ethically or morally ready for the technological development, should we still create it? But it seems more like we evolve uh, with the technological changes, like when it happens, and then we see that it's here and it's real, and we have to adapt to it. Uh, so, we have these AI changes coming in. They're going to probably cause a lot of pain, a lot of unemployment, a lot of people having to really wrestle and grapple with themselves. How do you think that crisis is going to manifest and look like for a lot of people?
And you're already seeing the beginning of it. We already saw the beginning of it, especially during when COVID was really prominent. People got sent into their homes. They were forced to self-reflect basically because they were isolated. And then depression rates and anxiety rates skyrocketed. What do I do with myself? I'm not working.
Right.
I'm not working 60 hours a week and I have free time and it feels uncomfortable to have free time and it feels uncomfortable to be with myself. And what happens when we're by ourselves, we actually have to, again, reflect and look at our past and look where we come from and maybe look at some of the darker things. And this is what going into spirituality a little bit, St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul. We have to go through this, all the dark shit that we did in our lives that we don't necessarily want to look at and cleanse ourselves, so to speak, so we can move forward with values that we truly care about and that can help ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah. A lot of people seemed to handle that situation very poorly, I think. I remember people were
Yeah,
furious that the schools were closed. They did not want to be around their kids at all.
sure.
Um, but it is interesting the changes that society was opting to make when they were actually given freedom and choice, because everybody, not everybody, but a huge percentage of jobs went remote. And suddenly, people no longer had to live in these high pressure, super expensive cities that were totally separated from nature. A lot of people, huge numbers of people, fanned out across the country to smaller towns, more embedded in nature, uh, closer communities. Uh, And they changed the entire dynamics of the country when they did that. And suddenly all the nature parks were filled. RV dealerships were practically sold out because a bunch of people were buying RVs to go camping all across the country. So suddenly everybody had that choice. That's what they chose to do.
Sure. And it was uncomfortable for people at the beginning because, again, it was baked into the culture for how many years since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution? Okay, we're gonna take this school system that indoctrinates people into being worker bees that don't think critically and can't think outside of the box, and that trains them to work a 9 to 5 for their entire life until they're 65, and then they die, or retire and then get cancer and die. It's
Right.
it's terrible. I giggle here, but no, we see the absurdity of it now. And COVID actually allowed us to take a step back, and artificial intelligence and evolving technology is allowing us to take a step back and see what's actually important. And
Right.
what's actually important, that connection with nature and maybe traveling and spending
And
time with
community as well.
community. Exactly.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting because this is going to be forced more and more. It's not really like being talked about that much. Like I know there's a lot of impacts already. Like a lot of graphic designers are getting impacted. A lot of freelance workers, gig workers, and all of those types of jobs are being gunned for. But more and more, almost all white collar working professionals, their jobs are being gunned for by AI. Anything that you could spend all day on a computer doing. Uh, and the AI companies are not making any qualms about the fact that this is kind of what they're going for. And they're trying to say, oh, well, we're just going to train people to use AI. But the reality is a lot of people will probably be let go. So there is going to be a big time of adaptation where people will have to kind of think about who they are and what they want to do. And if there is a UBI, what they will want to do with their free time.
Okay, so maybe that goes back to that COVID precursor again. COVID
Yeah.
was the test trial of what artificial intelligence is going to be like.
Right.
And again, that dives into the meaning crisis. What do we want to do when we have more spare time? How do we want to share our time with people around us and with life? And that kind of drives us into it seems like everyone around me is an artist or a musician nowadays.
Right.
Everyone's going down this solopreneur route. And I think we're realizing that we don't want to slave away to big companies. We do want more freedom in our time. We do maybe only want to work hard labor 20 hours a week or something like that, if any.
Right.
And it's changing fast.
Yeah, and Gen Z seems to be kind of leading the way on this because they're sort of forced to be. Like a lot of companies, they're not even hiring junior roles anymore. You have the zero interest rate phenomenon ending where the interest rates jacked up, so money was expensive now. But also now that AI is proliferating everywhere, um, you don't need to hire as many juniors because for almost any role, where there's a junior, you have to train them up in that position, and that often involves writing out a task clearly and succinctly for them to be able to follow instructions and figure it out. But if you're writing out those instructions, that's already a prompt that you could just give to an AI to do it.
I see.
So they are kind of forced to reevaluate their prospects. And sometimes they live in a weird economy where it's like, oh, you can get lucky with a TikTok video you make and suddenly earn a year's salary from one video, which it's a really strange slot machine dynamic, but it is kind of the world they are inhabiting.
For me, that kind of goes back to something that we were talking about earlier again, which is there incentive for people to actually develop certain types of skills that we need in the world? And that's an interesting one. You said maybe you see some sense of laziness in the world where people aren't doing their jobs, and we didn't want to turn this into a whole, do your job kind of video, but it is prompting us to really stand back and say, do we care about the jobs that we have? And if we do, then are we truly taking the time to refine them and develop them so we're the best that we can be at that job?
Exactly. And there's just a crisis of apathy, I think.
Yeah, okay. And that goes along with depression. And yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it's partially depression, and it's partially about incentives, and partially about people feeling like they have a path up in the world,
Say that one more time.
a path
Oh,
up in the world.
they don't know where they're going.
Yeah,
Okay.
or it's like, or maybe they're just like stuck in the same position forever. I guess I could use the example I was telling you about earlier, but I'd hired a plumber to fix a toilet, and it kept leaking and leaking. They replaced one part on it, and they said, "Oh, the job is done," and they left. And the toilet was still leaking. There was another part that was also leaking. And it's not a very hard thing to evaluate, but I think it's just a matter of a lack of care in regards to it.
Yeah. And again, I think it goes back to that meaning crisis. Do we care about what we're doing genuinely? And developing that skill to allow us to continue to do the job well. And right now, there's so many options, and technology is evolving so rapidly. People don't know where to look or what to focus on. So there's a total lack of focus, which maybe breeds us being stagnant and depressed and apathetic. Like, what do I do next? I'm just going to scroll on TikTok forever and isolate myself.
Yeah, and actually, I think that's a really interesting topic to touch on here because a lot of people uh, have fallen prey to addiction in general. And if you just completely open up the floodgates, it's like in terms of nobody working anymore, how many people do you think will turn to addiction? Whether it be social media, doom scrolling, or just smoking weed all the time, or other things that might be even more harmful for them.
It's a tough one to say. You can't totally predict it. Maybe some futurists are working on this issue out there. I don't know the statistics, but I think it's always going to be that swing of the pendulum again. Okay, maybe for a period of time, there's going to be a big part of the population where people aren't really doing much. Maybe they are just kind of lazy as a compensation of working for so long. And then they'll swing to the other side of the pendulum where they find something that they love to do and they really pursue it, and then they'll swing back again, eventually find balance in life where they're not overworked, they're not lazy. It's
Right.
always the swing.
This is like the ideal, right? Where like people have found their perfect passion. They would do it whether or not they were paid for it. And if they didn't have to worry about making rent, like this is what they would focus on every day, no matter what. And the ideal is that everybody finds that thing, and it's something that's healthy for them in some way. And that could lead to some sort of evolution of society, and things could look like a utopia in some ways.
Sure. We got some kinks to work through. I think first and foremost, going back to the aspect of personal responsibility for our mental health, we can utilize the tools that we have. If we don't have good access to mental health, utilize AI to start out. There's nothing wrong with that. And then start to develop the critical thinking abilities and the reflective and contemplative skills. And what I mean by that is look back into your past, what made you who you are. Look into what makes you the person that you are and who you want to be, and what the bigger questions of life are and what you believe about the world, and take that into everyday life. Start to embody it, start to act out a different type of person, meditate on these things, and visualize it. Some of the best athletes in the world, and some of the best anything you can name, authors, writers, those are the same thing, but
Right.
sports stars, you see what I'm saying? They visualize and they meditate on it, and then they start to embody it through their practice, and then they bring it out into the world and really practice what they preach and work through all the stuff despite coming from whatever background they came from. So what I'm getting at is use the tools that we have and truly take back focus and do things like meditate and visualize.
Yeah. And I think something to keep in mind is that, it doesn't matter where you are right now, you can change your direction at any point in life. I was reading about some artist the other day who spent basically his whole life just being lazy on the couch until he woke up one day at like 30, and decided to essentially become a prolific artist and ended up having a lot of success with that. So I guess,
Yes, we all have that propensity. Find what you love to do. Explore yourself, explore your life, spend time on your own. Was it Blaise Pascal that said, we must spend, what's the quote? That we look it up. There's a Blaise Pascal quote where he said something like, we have to spend time alone.
Pascal quote.
On being alone. This is where ChatGPT comes in handy because we can look up the quotes. All humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone.
Thanks, Jamie.
It's a beautiful quote, and it's true. If we learn to make friends with ourselves again and compassionately understand our past and reconnect with these different aspects of ourselves, and we can start to bring that sense of compassion and understanding to the world around us. Is that making sense?
Yeah. On that note, I think that is a good wrap up to today's episode.
All right. Thank you for having me, man. This is a pleasure. I love doing this podcast and exploring technology and mental health. Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you for coming aboard. It's been a blast. Peace.